She didn't deny it. She didn't panic. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said, "Everyone does it." That sentence hit harder than the confession itself. I remember staring at her, waiting for the follow-up, an apology, regret, something human. It never came. She looked bored, like I'd just asked a stupid question. I said I was hurt, that this shattered me. She sighed and told me I was being dramatic, that cheating wasn't some rare evil, just something people do when they're unhappy. Her voice was calm, almost instructional. In that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had in my own marriage. Not angry, numb. I realized I wasn't standing in front of someone who made a mistake. I was standing in front of someone who had already justified it so thoroughly that guilt never even entered the room. She wasn't sorry I was in pain. She was annoyed that I didn't see things her way. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just about cheating. This was about values, about empathy, about realizing, all at once, that the woman I married didn't believe loyalty meant anything at all. Before everything broke, our marriage looked solid from the outside. We had routines, shared responsibilities, inside jokes that had survived years. We worked, paid bills, planned trips we never quite took. I believed we were a team. I believed stability meant safety. We weren't wildly romantic anymore, but I thought that was just adulthood, less passion, more partnership. She used to tell me she appreciated how reliable I was. I took pride in that. I showed up. I listened. I didn't disappear when things got hard. If we argued, I assumed it meant we cared enough to work through it. I never imagined I was slowly becoming background noise in my own life. Looking back, the marriage wasn't explosive or abusive or obviously broken. That's what makes this harder to accept. There was no clear warning that she had started rewriting the rules in her head. While I thought we were building something steady, she was quietly deciding that commitment was optional. And the scariest part is this. Nothing in our day-to-day life prepared me for how easily she would later say loyalty didn't matter. The changes didn't arrive like a storm. They crept in quietly, easy to excuse if you weren't looking for them. She started guarding her phone more carefully, angling the screen away from me, silencing notifications that used to buzz freely on the table. When I asked who she was texting, she answered casually, but without the warmth she used to have. I told myself I was imagining things. She began coming home later, always with reasonable explanations. Work ran long. Traffic was bad. She needed space to clear her head. Her tone changed too. Conversations felt shorter, more transactional. Eye contact faded. Laughter became rare. When I tried to reconnect, she acted distracted, as if I were interrupting something more important. The truth is, I noticed all of it. I just chose comfort over confrontation. I told myself marriages go through phases. That trust meant not questioning every shift in behavior. I ignored the small alarms because acknowledging them would have forced me to admit something was wrong. And I wasn't ready for that yet. The red flags were there, lined up clearly in hindsight. But at the time, I wrapped each one in excuses. She stopped sharing details about her day, not because nothing happened, but because, according to her, it was boring or you wouldn't get it. When I pressed, she accused me of interrogating her. I backed off, not wanting to be that husband. Her social media behavior changed too. New passwords, new privacy settings. She suddenly cared a lot about how she looked before leaving the house, even for quick errands. When I noticed, she smirked and said I should be happy she was taking care of herself. I swallowed the unease and nodded. The biggest red flag was how easily she dismissed my concerns. Anytime I said something felt off, she turned it back on me. I was stressed. I was insecure. I was projecting. And because I loved her, and because I didn't want to believe the alternative, I accepted her explanations over my own instincts. I wasn't blind. I was negotiating with reality. I explained away what my gut was screaming because admitting the truth would have meant admitting I was already losing her. The first real crack hit me one night in the kitchen. Nothing dramatic happened. No yelling. No confession. Just a sentence she said without looking up from her phone. I asked her a simple question about our weekend plans, something we used to enjoy talking about. She sighed, actually sighed, and said, "Why do you need to know everything?" That wasn't her. Or maybe it was the version of her I hadn't wanted to see yet. I remember standing there, holding my glass, feeling suddenly stupid for asking. The room felt colder. The silence after her words stretched too long. She didn't apologize, didn't notice my reaction, just kept scrolling, detached, uninterested, already somewhere else. In that moment, a thought crossed my mind that scared me more than anger ever could. She's emotionally gone. Not drifting. Not confused. Gone. I told myself it was stress, that I was reading too much into it. But my chest felt tight, like my body had recognized the truth before my brain was ready to accept it. That was the first time I felt it. Not suspicion, not jealousy, but loss. After that moment, her behavior didn't just change, it hardened. She became sharper, more defensive, like everything I said was an accusation, even when it wasn't. Simple questions turned into arguments. Neutral comments were met with eye rolls or silence. It felt like I was constantly stepping on emotional landmines I couldn't see. She stopped asking about me altogether. My day, my stress, my thoughts. None of it seemed to register anymore. If I talked, she half listened. If I went quiet, she didn't notice. There was no middle ground. I was either inconvenient noise or invisible. Affection faded in subtle but brutal ways. No casual touch when passing by. No leaning into me on the couch. Even her body language changed. Angled away, arms crossed. Distance where closeness used to be automatic. When I tried to close that gap, she pulled back and said I was being needy. What hurt most wasn't the distance itself, but how normal it seemed to her. Like she had already emotionally checked out and rewritten the rules without telling me. I kept trying to adapt, to be calmer, quieter, easier to live with. I didn't realize then that her shift wasn't a phase. It was preparation. The lies weren't dramatic. That's what made them harder to confront. They were small, unnecessary, and strangely careless. She'd tell me she was working late, but her story about the meeting kept changing. First it was with her team, then just one coworker, then suddenly it didn't matter, and I was obsessing over details. Times didn't line up. She said she left the office at 9, but her location history showed she'd been somewhere else an hour earlier. When I mentioned it, she laughed and said apps glitch all the time. I wanted to believe her, so I nodded, even though my stomach tightened every time she brushed it off. What really stood out was how irritated she got when I noticed inconsistencies. Instead of clarifying, she attacked my motives. Why was I checking? Why was I keeping track? Why couldn't I just trust her? The lies themselves almost mattered less than her reaction to being questioned. Deep down, I knew honest people don't get angry when the truth is simple. They don't deflect. They don't accuse you for noticing gaps. The lies didn't make sense because they weren't meant to convince me. They were meant to shut me up. By the time anything physical happened, the emotional distance was already complete. We lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, but it felt like we existed on separate timelines. Conversations became logistical, bills, schedules, errands. Nothing personal, nothing vulnerable. The space where intimacy used to live was empty. She stopped confiding in me. Whatever was bothering her, she handled it elsewhere. When I asked if something was wrong, she said she was fine, in a tone that made it clear the conversation was over. There was no curiosity about how I felt either. My presence had become optional. I remember lying next to her at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe, and realizing I felt lonelier than I ever had while single. Reaching for her felt awkward, almost intrusive. When I pulled away, she didn't notice or didn't care. That distance didn't happen overnight. It was built slowly, brick by brick, through indifference. Looking back, the affair didn't create the gap between us. It just filled a space she had already emptied. By the time I caught up emotionally, she had already moved on. I didn't discover it through a dramatic confession or a single explosive message. It unraveled quietly, the way lies usually do. One night, she left her laptop open on the kitchen table. I wasn't snooping, I was cleaning up. A notification popped up. A name I didn't recognize. A message that wasn't subtle enough to explain away. My chest tightened before my mind caught up. I read it once. Then again. There was familiarity in the words. Ease. Intimacy. Not flirtation, routine. The kind that comes from repetition. From history. From time spent together that I hadn't been part of. When I scrolled, it got worse. Plans. Jokes. Complaints about me. Complaints about our marriage. She talked about me like I was an obstacle, not a husband. Like I was something in the way of the life she was already living. I remember sitting there, the house completely silent, realizing this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't emotional confusion or just talking. This was a second relationship running parallel to our marriage. What shocked me most wasn't that she cheated. It was how long she had been doing it while coming home to me like nothing was wrong. I confronted her that same night. No build-up. No careful wording. I put the laptop on the table and asked her to explain what I had just read. She didn't panic. She didn't ask how I found it. She barely reacted at all. She looked at the screen, then at me, and sighed like I had just inconvenienced her. "It's not what you think," she said flatly. Not defensively. Not emotionally. Just rehearsed. I asked her how long it had been going on. She shrugged. Actually shrugged. Does it matter? That's when I felt something crack inside me. I was standing there with proof of betrayal, and she was already emotionally finished with the conversation. When I asked if she cheated, she didn't deny it. She just said, "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." No apology. No guilt. No fear of losing me. Just irritation that I was forcing her to deal with it. In that moment, I realized I wasn't confronting someone who made a mistake. I was confronting someone who had already justified everything and had no intention of caring how much it destroyed me. What followed was worse than the cheating itself. I kept waiting for something human to appear on her face. Shame, regret, even fear. It never came. She spoke calmly, almost clinically, explaining that it meant nothing and that I was reacting emotionally instead of logically. When I asked how she could do this and feel nothing, she didn't hesitate. "Because I don't feel guilty," she said. "I don't think I did anything wrong." She reframed everything. Our problems were my fault. Her unhappiness was my responsibility. The affair was just a consequence, not a choice. When I asked if she understood how much this hurt me, she rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. That word, dramatic, hit harder than any insult. It told me she had already detached from my pain. There was no remorse to negotiate with, no empathy to reach for, just a cold confidence that she didn't owe me guilt, explanations, or loyalty. Standing there, I realized the most devastating part wasn't what she did, it was who she had become. Or maybe who she had been all along. That was the moment I understood. A betrayal without guilt isn't a mistake. It's a decision made by someone who has already left emotionally. After the confrontation, everything inside me caved in at once. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but quietly, painfully, like a structure that had been hollowed out over time and finally gave up. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. My thoughts looped nonstop, replaying every moment, every excuse, every time I had chosen trust over instinct. I kept asking myself how someone I loved could look at me with such indifference. How my pain could register as an inconvenience instead of a consequence. The lack of guilt broke something fundamental in me. Anger would have been easier. Tears would have meant she still cared. But there was nothing. Just emotional emptiness where empathy should have been. I remember sitting alone in the living room at 3 in the morning, staring at nothing, feeling completely disconnected from my own body. My chest felt heavy, my hands numb. I wasn't just losing my marriage. I was losing my sense of reality. I questioned my judgment, my worth, my entire understanding of love. That collapse wasn't weakness. It was the moment my mind finally caught up to the truth my gut had been trying to tell me for months. When someone betrays you and feels no guilt, they don't just break your trust. They dismantle your sense of safety. The decision didn't come with confidence or relief. It came with exhaustion. I realized I was chasing something that no longer existed, if it ever truly had. I was explaining my pain to someone who had already decided it didn't matter, begging for empathy from a person who felt justified in hurting me. I noticed how every conversation followed the same pattern. I spoke. She dismissed. I tried again. She detached further. The more I reached for her, the colder she became. That's when it finally clicked. My effort wasn't saving the marriage. It was feeding her indifference. One night, in the middle of an argument that went nowhere, I stopped talking. Mid-sentence. I just went quiet. She kept scrolling on her phone, barely noticing. And strangely, that silence felt clearer than anything we had said in months. I understood then that chasing someone who feels no guilt is a form of self-betrayal. Love without empathy isn't love, it's endurance. And I was done enduring. Walking away emotionally didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I finally started respecting myself. Once I stopped chasing, everything shifted. Not because she suddenly cared, but because I no longer needed her to. I created distance, not out of spite, but out of survival. I spoke less. I reacted less. I stopped explaining myself to someone committed to misunderstanding me. She noticed the change, but not in the way I expected. There was no concern for my pain, only confusion about losing control. When I pulled back, She asked why I was being cold. The irony almost made me laugh. Detachment only felt cruel to her when she wasn't the one in control of it. Living in the same space became easier once I accepted the emotional separation. I stopped expecting warmth and, in doing so, stopped being disappointed. The tension faded because I no longer resisted reality. I wasn't waiting for apologies that would never come. Distance gave me clarity. Detachment gave me peace. I saw her for who she was, not who I hoped she could be. And with that clarity came something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. When you stop chasing someone who feels no guilt, you don't lose them. You find yourself. Looking back, I don't think the affair was the moment my marriage ended. The moment she showed no guilt was. Cheating hurts, but cheating without remorse changes how you see everything. Love, trust, even yourself. When someone can betray you and feel nothing, they're telling you exactly who they are. The mistake is not believing them the first time. I learned that explanations don't heal betrayal. Remorse does. Tears matter. Accountability matters. Empathy matters. Without those, what you're holding onto isn't love, it's hope attached to denial. And hope without evidence becomes self-destruction. If you're reading this and you're in the same place I was, hear this clearly. Stop begging someone to care. Stop chasing clarity from someone who feels entitled to your pain. Self-respect begins the moment you choose reality over excuses. Cheating hurts, but cheating without guilt is the final betrayal.